there's just little doubt that AI has been on your mind. It's, I think, on everybody's mind, right? Whether you're wondering how you're going to leverage it to be more effective or efficient in your own work, or if you're thinking about how you can help students or colleagues to use it ethically, to enhance their learning, to enhance their work. And whether you're new to this topic or you're pretty experienced, we tried to design today's event to give something for everyone. Um, but before I introduce the keynote, I just want to ask you, if you do think of a topic that's in the realm of teaching or learning, make sure you let us know. We have a form on our website, or you can just email me. And anyway, I'd love to hear from you. So with that, just to welcome Lance Eaton. He's our keynote speaker today. I actually heard him speak and I thought, wow, we have to get this guy to come to NDSU. If you want to play while I talk, that's fine. He's a writer and educator. He's a faculty developer. He has a job very similar to mine at his college. He's an instructional designer. He's an educational consultant, and he comes to us from Providence, Rhode Island. He's earned degrees, lots of degrees, in history, criminal justice, American studies, public administration, instructional design, and he's currently working on a PhD in higher education at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. He's focusing his dissertation work on academic piracy and the limitations of higher education's knowledge production mission. So maybe somebody you want to pick his brain later if you run into him. If you're interested in hearing more from Lance after today's events, you can find he's got quite a bit of published writing out there in numerous venues, and he has a blog that he maintains on AI in higher education and has a YouTube channel. And so we'll share that with you after the conference as well. And with
Welcome, everybody. Glad to be here. Also glad to see we are very much like our students and have nobody in the front row. It's fine. We know. For organizers, one tip I've seen is to actually put reserved on all the back tables, and that forces them forward. But I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be talking about generative AI. I've been playing with it, like many others since it first came out. And also, I think even prior to that, a lot of my work in higher ed has been always in this space of thinking about teaching and learning and technology, because really since we started writing, and I would say even before that, all teaching and learning entails technology. And so what does that mean? How do we think about that? How do we navigate that, particularly in ways when we know not all technology fits everyone? So that's kind of a lot of what my thinking is as I stepped into this, and as I've been continuing to have conversations with faculty, have conversations with staff, with students, and the like. And I'll just give a very brief synopsis of one of the big ways two big ways I stepped into this. One is, and you may have come across this resource back in January 2023. I'm also a big fan of open access, open educational resources, and a lot of January happened and people were like, what are we going to do? And I started a crowdsourced document around AI policies and syllabi. That document, and it's in the resources, now has 150 different policies from syllabi from universities around the country and around the world. And it's a really great resource to go in, because one section of it, actually, you can filter by discipline to see what other people in your discipline are doing in terms of generative AI for their classroom. The other thing I did was, at my institution, we really, really think about the student experience. That is, we try to be student-centered in ways other institutions aren't. And so I actually went to my provost and we need to figure out generative AI, but we need to do it with students. And so I pitched a course. And again, this is in January. I mean, this was late December. ChatGPT hadn't even been out a month. And I'm like, let's pitch a course on AI in education and figure it out with students. And so that's what we did. I pitched it, I ran with it, and engaged with the students with the goal of let's learn it, play with it, and what does this mean for education? And so with students, we actually developed usage policy for students and faculty. We did that in the first session. And in the second session, we had the students actually test pilot it and actually does this work? Where is their tension? Does this make sense? Once that was done and we had it more revised, we actually gave it over to faculty to do comments, to do feedback. Faculty comments were actually really great. They were always about parity, meaning if we're asking this of faculty, we need to ask this of students. If it's framed this way, it should be framed that way. We got through that, And actually, this past March, it was passed as our institutional guidance policy on faculty and student use of generative AI. And so that's a lot of the place where I come from, is really thinking about it and through it with students, because it's going to be impacting them. They're going to be graduating, 6 months, a year from now, and going into fields that there's going to be some expectation, or people are looking to figure out what are the relevant use cases here. So long introduction, but I think hopefully useful for getting a sense of where I come from and what we'll talk about next. So I like to play a game when the clicker is working. Maybe there we go. I like to start off with this. I would love to hear from people. What is generative AI? Put wrong answers only. So what do we got? Always a good one. Skynet from the Terminator. Absolutely. Never mind, it sometimes won't be able to tell you the right numbers, but it will come with force. Absolutely. What else? It's alive. Ooh, this is the Frankensteinian moment, right? It's alive. Others. What was it? It's all quant? Yep. All right. What else? No other takers? Come on. It's always right. There we go. We know that's one we love to see those right answers that it always spits out. One more time. All right. Creative writing. Creative writing, or creative at some things around writing. We'll maybe frame it that way, right? So I did the quintessential thing when you're doing AI. Of course, I went to AI to ask it, tell me what AI is, right? And so it came up with a fun enough answer, right? Generative AI is a magical creature that lives inside your computer and makes all your dreams come true. It spends its days knitting digital sweaters and baking cookies for other programs. In its spare time, it enjoys composing symphonies for squirrels and painting abstract portraits of invisible friends. The primary function of generative AI is to serve as a professional online fortune teller, although I feel like that might be true, predicting whether you'll have spaghetti or tacos for dinner based on the alignment of your browser history. I feel like it started to tell the truth in that last sentence. I'm just saying. All right. So what I want to do actually, what you're going to notice is several times here, I'm going to actually engage, ask for answers, ask for people to show hands, those kind of things. And that's because, again, just as other educators, like, I don't feel comfortable standing up here just talking at you for the next hour. I want to make sure that folks actually have a part of this. And I think the thing I'm going to be driving home, which your provost also pointed to, is that so much of what so much of what there is to figure out around AI doesn't sit with any one of us. It sits with us collectively. And so really hearing from other folks and engaging with other folks is going to be really important. So first up, just show of hands, how many of us are uh, uh show of no hands, one hands, or two hands of level of intensity. How ambiguous do you feel about generative AI in general? So two hands if you're like, whew. All right. We're getting a mix. We're seeing some two hands, some one hands for the folks on Zoom. Okay. All right. Others are like, nah, I'm good. I've got it figured out in one way or another, or I've got to figure out that I don't have it figured out. How many folks currently use generative AI for personal use, that you use it in some capacity? All right. All right. We've got like a quarter in here. Good to see. Good to see. How many use generative AI for professional use? All right. Increasingly, quarter, also a quarter, a little bit different from that first one. Let's see, how have you used generative AI to help with, have you used generative AI to help you with creating course content? All right. A few more folks. Excellent. What about, have you used generative AI with your students? All right. 6 or 7. I've got like a half one coming in. All right. It's like the not sort of. All right. So let's talk about a couple of the tools out there, because like we know ChatGPT, or many of us know ChatGPT, but like it's also felt like there's just so many of them. So like, show of hands, how many have heard of ChatGPT as a generative AI tool? Right? Nearly everybody, it looks like. What about Claude? Okay, not too many Claudes out there. I will say, as the tools out there, Claude is quickly it has been the one I'm leaning into a lot more these days. And that's one of the challenges, is there's a lot of changes, and trying to keep track of them is a headache. What about Bing or Copilot? People are familiar with. All right. It looked like 2/3 there. Oops, jumped ahead. Gemini slash Bard. Again, probably at least half. What about Barnabas? Any Barnabas takers? All right. What about Perplexity? Okay, fewer. That's all right. Perplexity is a really interesting one to play around with. It was one of the first ones that you could use without having an account, and it also uses the web live and actually links to the materials. Right, Sonic? Anybody using that? All right. So here are some of the more popular tools. Of course, they're not all popular tools. Barnabas, I did make up, which I was really glad to see nobody in this crowd actually raise their hand. I did that like 2 weeks ago, and just one person fiercely raised their hand, and but I didn't blame her. Like, it can feel like I've heard about a bajillion tools. So, um, one of the things that is challenging in this is, on the one level, if you've been around in higher ed, you still remember MOOCs, right? You still remember the MOOC hype. And it can be very easy to dismiss generative AI as another like tech hype cycle. And I feel that. I feel that daily. And also, there feels something different about generative AI. So, first of all, generative AI is different from the AI that we've been using for at least a decade, right? Most of us are familiar with AI because, we'll talk to Siri or Alexa, and hopefully I didn't set anybody's off. We're familiar with it in that sense, in some of the machine learning sense that, does a lot of things that we're less, we're just less thinking about as the AI that we're thinking about today. Um, so I think the thing about those is those don't feel as impressive. They don't feel as easy to use right out of the box. But generative AI that can generate text, audio, image, or like just through everyday language, just through writing something in, that feels different. That the ease of use is different. I'll give another example. We are, I guess, 3, 4 years, I don't know how many years at this point, into the launch of the metaverse. Um, can anybody in 50 words or less tell me what the metaverse is? No takers. Has anybody been to the metaverse? Like, how do you get there? I feel like we need a Sesame Street song on how to get to the metaverse. I work in the space and also still can't, like, on some fundamental level, figure out the appeal of the metaverse. But people are pouring billions of dollars into it. And so this is how generative AI is just fundamentally different. Because generative AI comes to us in the form of a chat box. And like, I was on the internet in the 90s on like Prodigy and AOL. Like, if there's something I know, it's a chat box, right? If there's something that we all use daily in texting our friends and family and students and whatnot, it's a text box. And so the creators of generative AI took something incredibly complex and nuanced and made it into a usable text box. And that made it such an devilishly easy invitation, right? So much so that generative AI comes out November 30th, 2022. By February 1st, it has 100 million users. It took TikTok 8 months. It took Instagram like a year or 16 months to get to that number. Like, the ability to grow that fast because of that simpleness of its user interface is important to acknowledge. Is important to recognize why it is here, and it feels like it's everywhere. So, as I said, as I started to do some of the interaction, is that one of the things that's going to be really important, and this is sometimes hard, particularly for academia, is that like we actually need to lean on one another, and we can't assume or put the pressure on ourselves to be the singular expert. Now I get pulled, like I'm here as an expert coming to talk about this, but I will tell you, I do not think of myself as an expert only in that I regularly have my collection of folks, friends and colleagues who help me figure this out because there's so much to have to figure out and pack and repack and think differently. And so the one thing I'm going to tell you, and again, as we're raising hands, as we're seeing who's doing what, is like that extension that your provost made is like talk to other people that are using it in different ways, have those conversations. You will be better for it. And also you do not and should not be the one to carry it all. It's impossible. It's moving at a pace that's hard to follow. And the only way you figure things out is through practice and conversation. And so today I'm gonna, in this talk, share more about ways to use it. And then in the two workshops later on, have some time to play with it. But just realize everything that I have learned and done here has all been through communities of practice, have been all through in conversation, working with other folks to figure this out. Okay, so here's one of the ways that many have figured out how to use it, right? And I'll be going through a couple different categories of usage to give people some frameworks to think about how might I use it. The first is just efficiency, right? There's a lot of tedious stuff we have to do in academia, am I right? No, everybody loves all the extra stuff we have to do. And so this is one of the area where I find it really powerful, really helpful. And one of the ways I think about it is it can be a task minimizer. Won't necessarily eliminate tasks, but it will reduce the amount of time we have to spend on them, right? It can help me with other things that I'm working on, accessibility, adapting content, generating dates and lists of things that I'm trying to figure out, agendas, those types of stuff, all of that, it can help with. And so many of the things you'll hear me talk about is we can all do. Like, I don't think generative AI is doing anything that we can't do, but sometimes the scale, the speed, and the ability to do it in a semi-dialogical way is what really helps. So I'm about to save you collectively hours of time because we're about to start the semester. How many people do this every semester? You pull up your syllabus. You pull up a calendar. She's already got her hand up. You pull up a calendar and you toggle back and forth to get the dates for each of your classes. How many people do that? Show of hands. All right. All right. Other folks are like, nope, already figured that out. There's some other hack. That's great. This prompt and its follow-up prompt are just really helpful. This is what I do now every semester. Is I go to ChatGPT or Claude. I say, here's when my semester starts. Here's when my semester ends. Give me all the Tuesdays between those two dates. And then I give it a follow-up prompt of saying, oh yeah, what are the holidays? And then boom, it spits out a list that I can now copy and paste into my syllabus, right? So put it in like that. And then in 30 seconds or less, really nowadays, it's more like 5 seconds or less, it spits that out. Incredibly helpful, in a very simple way. And I should say, and I forgot to mention this, the link that's on every slide, and we'll return to it several times. That link is to a resource document. Any of the prompts that I'm covering today, you'll find in there. A lot more resources and things that you will find in there. And if you're not attending the workshops later on, all the stuff that we have will be in that resource doc, as well as the slides. I do a lot of work with Creative Commons, open educational resources. So anytime I create stuff, I like to put it out into the wild for others to enjoy. All right, so that was the second prompt. It gave me the particular holidays. And again, just incredibly useful. So let's play a little bit more true and false. Generative AI may be becoming sentient. That is alive. Raise your hands if you think that's true. That's right. We're all academics. We're way more skeptical, right? And we're like, that's a lot of media hype. And it is, right? Oops, went the wrong way. It is, right? Generative AI is not a thinking being. And I know like we hear that so much in different ways, like it's on the brink, we're gonna be close, and it's not. We suffer from millennia of storytelling about how our things are going to become animate. Animate. Our inanimate things are going to become animate. But we have to understand this is a very complex technology to a degree that many folks, even those using it, those creating it, don't fully understand it. But sentience is not in the immediate future. But we have to understand, and this is where it's important with our students, we have to understand this tendency to anthropomorphize our objects can create challenges, right? And this is actually known as the ELIZA effect. Is anybody familiar with the ELIZA effect? Somebody, you want to say what it is? So our tendency to put human qualities onto a computer if it's interacting with us in a particular way, it comes from a machine named ELIZA in the 1960s, 1970s that just had a very good program of when somebody typed in a question, it responded or typed in a comment, it responded with a question using those words. So it would be something like, I've been, I've been having a hard time with my spouse. Well, what is wrong with your spouse? Which let's just check that language. Didn't say it was perfect, right? But this is the thing: is it became like people saw that and increasingly thought, "Oh my gosh, Eliza is real. She understands me." Again, something we see in our movies and stories and stuff. But we want to remember this effect because it's very easy to give that attribution. Like in my house, we jokingly, me and my partner will call chat GPT or generative AI in general, we'll call it Chad, right? And we'll call it him, right? But we also do that playfully. It's gonna be very easy to kind of like not think of it as something else. All right. So what do we think about this one? Generative artificial intelligence is similar to human thinking when it arrives at its answer. True or false? Oh, we got a few people who are like, uh. So this is false, right? First of all, we all think differently, right? This is why we talk about neurodiversity, right? I am still, and I've known this now for a few years, I'm still floored by the idea that like we have people who have internal monologues and people who don't, right? Like that's the thing that I've found is like I have an internal monologue. There's always a voice that's kind of like talking through, planning through. I'm literally talking to myself in my head, and then there's other people who don't. And I'm like, wow, that is a very, very different way of thinking and experiencing the world. The other piece here is that our minds are composed of whole things, be it words or images or sounds. And by contrast, AI works through just mathing the hell out of things, right? Like that is the basic way to describe this. So when working with a text, generative AI will rely on what's called the large language model. And this is a massive data set of text, and the statistical models calculate the relationships within that text. The large language model was created by the AI tool mathematically analyzing the relationships of that massive text, but it does it differently. It doesn't do it in words. It does it in what it calls our tokens, 4 to 5 characters. So in our, instead of the word school, it may only use SCHO or SCHOO, right? It is taking down the little bits and pieces of words and mathematically connecting relationships across them in this vast data collection, in this vast large language model. The AI then calculates the probability of relationships across those tokens, across that data set, with any prompt you give it. So all it's doing, it's like you come up and you give it a prompt, and it looks at that prompt and it like mathematically calculates the relationships among all those different tokens in that prompt. And then it goes back into its large language model and be like, all right, where have we seen something like this, and how do we connect what has been put in front of us with what's within our data set. And there's an important part of this that is that I think is key, is it does this without awareness, right? It has no awareness of the answers it puts out any more than a calculator did when those of us that might have done this with calculators would use it to make words, whether those words were appropriate or not. Okay, a few folks remember those days, right? Like just like you can make a calculator write the word upside down, giggle. The calculator has no sense that it has said giggle. That's the same way that generative AI works, right? That it has no internal understanding. And again, that's important because this, as we'll see, like this is where the challenge and the tension is. It has that confidence, right? It has that confidence of a person named Chad. Hopefully, nobody here is named Chad, but it has that like confidence of somebody being like, "Yeah, I know the answer," but it has no awareness of what it's saying. All right. So let's talk a little bit about brainstorming, right? This is probably one of the areas that I think generative AI is most useful, relevant. I know for myself, it gets me out of my head. It gets, when I don't have another person to like spend a good half hour pulling out whiteboards and going back and forth, it can be really helpful. So different ways, generating different activities for learning, planning, right? Coming up with different plans. So I want to do X, give me 3 different plans. Concept mapping, self-assessment, like help me figure out my own stuff, not in a therapeutic sort of way, but like I'm trying to work through this project. I mean, some people have, I don't recommend it. Or just as a dialogue partner, somebody to challenge and engage with. So again, here's one where let me make sure I have the right prompt in. Yep. So here's one where I asked it, right? So I'm telling it to act as a expert in educational development and with experience, particularly around nuances and subtleties and in working with faculty to rethink pedagogical approaches through a variety of lenses, right? So I'm saying to the generative AI, these are like the keywords, right? These are the things I want you to think are really important, and then I'm giving it the challenge of you're a faculty member. I want you to revise, that's looking to revise a course on, say, adolescent development for middle and high school teachers. And I want you to do that using open pedagogy. And then I want you to give me some ideas around objectives, activities, and assessments, particularly around a section of the course about developmentally appropriate practices. It's a pretty complex prompt. And what I'm doing is like, I want to revise this section and I want some different takes on how I might revise that section. So sure enough, it again, it gave me 3 different ones. I'm just including a brief capture of one here. But this is what it ends up doing well is it's like, okay, if you want to do open pedagogy, you might have students collaborate in a research project that creates a publicly available report or an infographic that highlights the different cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds affect development. And it gives me some additional alternative approaches. So this is what I mean is like I can get there. Many of us can get here. And I don't doubt that about us, but the idea that I can get here quicker, or it can help me think through or find 3, 4, 5, 10 different examples, right? We know as humans, like we can be absolutely creative and come up with different things, but after the first, and we see this sometimes when we do these things with our students, like after the first 5 to 8, the next ones keep getting harder and harder to get to. So one of the things that I've been working with at my institution, one of the things that I think is really powerful for all of us to consider is where I find generative AI most powerful is when we flip the script on it. When we turn generative AI into an interviewer. In fact, at our institution, we're playing around with this, particularly around the role of reflection, right? That when you tell generative AI to interview you and ask you one question at a time around whatever it is, it doesn't feel anymore like cheating, which, we have all sorts of feels about, but it feels fundamentally different because now it's me trying to reflect, me trying to figure things out, and just having somebody there to ask the questions that I sometimes am not going to think about, or to reflect back at me what I said, right? That idea of having somebody talk to us, how many times have somebody just sat there and asked the right questions and you realize, oh, I had the answer all the time, right? We have those experiences. And this is one of the areas I think it's really powerful is just asking us, getting it to ask us questions, and therefore then being able to actually know we have our own answers. And then of course, for our students, that's really powerful. All right, now we got a little more trickier question. Uh, Generative AI can lie. Raise your hands if you think that's true. Okay, getting a few people. I'm getting skeptical looks from others. All right, it's not true, right? Why isn't it true? Boom. Lying requires intention. Intention is human. And so this is where it gets tricky. This is that challenge, that Eliza effect. Is like it can definitely give false information, 1000%. But when you hear language about it lying, or what's the other word we use for it? What's hallucinate, right? How many people have heard AI hallucinates? It doesn't hallucinate. There's nothing there to hallucinate. It it's calculating probability, right? So it has miscalculated. It has not given the accurate information, but it's not lying. It's not hallucinating. And so again, it's very easy for us to give over a variety of thoughts or feels about how we think it is, and we have to guard ourselves on that because down the line, that giving up of agency or that bestowing of different things upon it backfires. All right, how about generative AI is going to take all of our jobs? True or false? Yeah. All right. All right. You guys are on to me. You guys are on to me. Um, it's not. But of course, it is going to it's not going to take all of our jobs, but to say it's not going to disrupt or augment or eliminate some jobs, that has been the history of technology, right? There's a reason why we can have academics, and that's because we have a sophisticated agricultural structure that allows for us, not everybody, to be working on the food, building and curating and growing and all of that we have to do around food. So that is something that I think is important for us to remember is it's not going to take our jobs, but it's going to impact many, many different industries. And this is the time in which people are figuring it out. And for us as educators, this is where it's most challenging because there's going to be that tension to want to be like, not in my room, right? There's going to be the tension that I saw and also pushed back against in the late 2000s with Wikipedia of like, not on my watch, it's banned. Like we can't do that because this is going to be a tool that's going to show up in lots of different industries. And it's actually our mission to figure out how and why. Where is it going to show up in our disciplines, in our industries? And that's hard because, as the provost pointed out, like it just feels like it's another thing, right? And so again, that's why I say look to everybody, look to your communities of practice, figure it out together. There has already been its own tidal wave of resources and ideas and ways of doing this in most different disciplines. I have a collection of articles because I do a Google Scholar search on generative AI and education, and I have already over 1,000 articles, and there's plenty of articles in many disciplines about how to use this in teaching and learning, right? So not just teaching and learning in general, but teaching and learning in engineering, teaching and learning with generative AI and math, in history, all of those things. So just understand that it's gonna be here, and banning it isn't going to necessarily work. So then let's talk actually, the thing that is both the benefit and the bane, as many may have experienced in their classes over the last year and a half, of content generation. Because it can be a challenge, but it can also do things and produce things that can be really helpful, right? So just outlines, strategic projects, and mapping it out, assignment guidelines. I found it to be really helpful, in creating rubrics and also helping with like course guides, creating quizzes or knowledge checks. I also really love it for student examples. So we all absolutely love going to a student and being like, your paper was awesome. Can I use it as an example for future students? Like, we love that, right? There's a very well honored tradition of doing that, getting that permission and being like, here's what another student did. They're so awesome. But we're never, ever, 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 ever gonna go to a student and say, your paper was crap. Can I use it as a bad example? Not gonna happen, nor should it. I'm just to be clear, nor should it. But being able to actually present a range, and that can be on a paper, that can be on discussion posts. This is where I really appreciate it, is I can use it with discussion posts because I want students to see the really great ones, but I also want them to understand, like, if this is where you're at, you need to do more. Like this isn't going to be passable. right? So this is, again, one of those areas where I'm just like, it's really helpful. I don't have to come up with it. I can put in a prompt. It can give me one for like every different discussion or every other week or every different course. So again, here's a prompt where I'm saying you're an expert in developing collaborative student assignments. Develop a rubric for students that are conducting peer reviews, right? So it's in a course where I'm going to have students actually do the first round of providing feedback to one another. Make sure the rubric is in accessible language and helpful in guiding the peer reviewer to identify clear elements. There should be 3 levels of evaluation. All language should be structured in asset-based language, and then the output should be in the form of a table. So again, I get that pretty quickly. I rubric, and let me be clear, rubrics, some people love them, some people don't. I think they're great guides, and the thing I hate about them is filling in all the squares, right? Most of us are like, conceptually, they're great. Filling out all the squares, not so much. So again, and again, and like this is the other power of it is I can answer this and I can say, actually change X, actually remove this category, introduce that category. And it's just a dialogue. It's just that chat box back and forth. So one of the things around all of this, and I've already been kind of hinting at, is like with generative AI, to use it well, like really well, the kind of well that feels like it's value added and not tedious, is that we need 2 buckets. And this is where we really have to lean in with our students to help them understand that they need 2 buckets. The first bucket is that bucket of just understanding what generative AI is and what it isn't, what it can do, and what all those tech bros in Silicon Valley tell us it's going to do, right? Where is that actual line of what you can do? We as instructors and educators and faculty, like we have to understand that. It's part of why, some of the things that I've been sharing today is really understand what it is and what it isn't. But the other bucket is a deep well of knowledge about the thing you're asking it about. So I can go and ask ChatGPT or Claude or any of those, all sorts of stuff about educational development, because I've been doing that work for 14, 15 years now. I can also ask it about physics, but I won't know a dang thing. I just won't. I'll be like, that sounds good. That Chad sounds really confident. I'm going to go with Chad because I certainly don't know. Right. And so this is the thing we have to lean into and help students understand is like, if they don't have the disciplinary knowledge, it's not going to help them. My colleague and friend, co-author Maha Bali, she's amazing. If you're not following her, please do. She has this saying about generative AI is that, the problem with it is that it's right 99% of the time. We may probably, that percentage might be more like 90, whatever. But it's right. It's right more often than not. And that's the problem because it is, we again give more agency over to it. We are less likely to be, to scrutinize the results, or some folks will be less likely to scrutinize the results. And that's what we have to like help our students understand is it can very easily go wrong and you're not going to know. You're not going to be able to discern. And if that's, that is the key of our disciplines is the discernment, is the clarity, is understanding what is real within our areas of study and what is just a hallucination. Okay, true or false? Generative AI only has information since 2022 when it was released. True or false? Oh, I got a straight up thumbs down. Like fake news right there. That's a hallucination, right? First of all, we now have lots of different models, right? As I showed, we have several different tools. Some of them work live from the internet, like Perplexity. Some of them can, if you tell it to look upon the internet and the like. But we have to understand that each model, each tool comes with a different set of variables about what it's doing. And that too is its own challenge, right? Again, I don't want to, I don't want to pretend like these aren't real challenges and that we have to figure it out. And that might also help you think about which tools you want to use. But yeah, each tool is going to come with a different like best buy date, if you will. So, oops, already moved forward. What about this one? Generative AI detectors can determine if something was created with generative AI. Show of hands if true. Oh, no, get more thumbs. I got a straight up thumbs down. Any others? So it's false. First off, generative AI detectors are only calculating probability. They're not actually proving anything, right? This is different in some fundamental ways from your traditional like Turnitin or typical plagiarism checkers, which can say like, boom, here is a thing that exists somewhere, pre-exists the thing that you submitted. And here's what you submitted, and here's where it looks shockingly similar. I still have issues with plagiarism checkers, but generative AI plagiarism checkers is like, huh, this kind of mathematically looks like how this thing over here calculates answers. I don't know if it calculated this answer, but man, it looks pretty similar. That is a problem with that because first you're gonna have a false positive rate that is significant, and you're gonna have a false positive rate as the studies have shown with students who English is not their first language, with English language learners. Why? Anybody want to take a guess at why? We learn language like a formula. ChatGPT produces, or generative AI produces language like a formula, right? As we're learning, we're building those structures. Like there's a very different style of how we learn a language than once we are immersed fully in it. And to me, and again, this comes from my context, comes from my work of the thing that like feels so unsettling is the idea of talking to a student who English is not their first language and accusing them of using a tool to which I don't fully understand, to which they have no means of defending themselves, because again, the tool is just saying probability. So there's no way to produce evidence of innocence, or there can be, but like you have to know in advance you're going to be accused to create that paper trail. In trying to do that in a language that isn't the language I've grown up and used for decades, right? So generative AI detectors I don't put a lot of stock into them. I think they can be more alienating than helpful. And I think they're trying to solve for the wrong problem. And you will hear most recently ChatGPT is like, we have a tool that watermarks things that are made with generative AI. Well, they have a tool that watermarks things that are generated by generative AI, but sorry, by ChatGPT. Of course, like there's a bunch of other tools out there. Okay. So I hit upon this a little bit earlier that avoidance is not a strategy. So abstinence has never been a great strategy. Didn't work for prohibition, didn't work for the war on drugs, didn't work for abstinence only sex education. It's not going to work for generative AI. This means like it is important for us to learn about it, play with it, engage with it. And it's not about, banning it or dismissing it is not going to do anything other than delegitimize ourselves to our students. And I mean, if you've looked at higher ed in the last few years, we already do plenty to delegitimize ourselves. We already do plenty to disconnect ourselves from the world that people live in. And so this doesn't mean you can't have guardrails, right? It doesn't mean you can't come up with what are the expectations of use. You should have them. You should have clarity about them. You should have a conversation about it. But to say don't do it at all isn't going to be helpful again to them, because this is the thing in my class that I learned that was so powerful is that students want to understand where it does and doesn't make sense. And it's not about, I mean, for some it may be about the cheating, but by and large it's not about the cheating, but figuring out how might this be useful. I wouldn't have discovered one of the most fascinating use cases that just flipped my thinking about it. I had a student who, in this class that we were figuring out the AI policy, she comes in and she's just like, I'm not sure what to do. She's like, I took my notes, and I put it into ChatGPT to organize them. And it organized them. And then I went and started to write a paper. I was like, that's cool. She's like, yeah, but should I cite that? Like, what do I do with that? So she was really grappling with that. But as we got into the conversation, like, this is a student who she's in her 30s. She knows who she is. She's like, I never organize my notes. She's like, I'm just not that person. I'm never going to be that person. But by doing this actually got her. So she never organizes her notes. So she never really like steps into like starting to write the paper until, of course, the night before. Doing this was that hurdle for her. So she did this, and now she didn't actually like wait till the last minute because the notes were just a little bit more making sense to her that then allowed her to move forward. So there's lots of cool use cases like that where they're going to use it in ways we just didn't expect. That's actually going to be beneficial to them. It can be helpful to us. So I think this is the thing for me is to we can't avoid it, and it's gonna help us to figure out what are the cool, interesting, useful ways that students can benefit from this and that we can benefit from. Oops, went the wrong way. All right, so here's another area, data analysis and info processing. So again, I like the way that it can do summarizing, it can compare documents, we can have it to do some qualitative data to surface any particular themes and issues. Let me ask, how many of us have that folder of PDFs that we swear we're going to read? Yep, right. We have that folder. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. This is one of those areas where it's just like, I'm gonna be real with myself. Never gonna read those. I've had that folder. I've had that folder for 15 plus years. Right. I had it from when it was in paper, and then I digitized it because then I definitely read it. Right. But more often now, I'm making a habit of like, well, I can take that article and throw it in to one of these tools and say like, and I have a prompt that I use, but use it to be like, all right, tell me the relevant pieces of ideas, information, outputs of this document as it relates to the thing that I'm interested in. So sometimes it's what's related to faculty development. Other times it's just related to things that are of interest to me that the article might be touching upon. But this is one of the areas where I've again found it useful to do things that I probably just would keep piling up and never think about. So in this case, at my institution, every 4 weeks, we're getting feedback from students. We're not that big of a school, but we've got 500 students. So every 4 weeks, we've got 500 students, more like 250 because not everybody does feedback, does the mid-course evaluations or end of course evaluations. But every 4 weeks, we have about 250 students doing this across across each of their 4 classes. Mathematically, that's a lot. Most of it's qualitative questions, and trying to get through that is just really hard. So what I've started to do is like I do a first run through that data to remove names just because I want to respect the privacy, but they're generally anonymous. So I take out that stuff and then I put this prompt into the generative AI tool, which is basically like uh, I have it focus on one area of the evaluation, which is about how faculty are using the learning management system. I say, take a look at that, identify major themes, concerns, examples of positive use. And then for each, concern or example, provide a detailed description, 2 to 3 exact quotes. So I know like exactly what people are saying, and 2 to 3 recommendations for follow-up actions. What I love about this is it gives me the overall view, those recommendations for actions. I can also start to, craft a I can start to craft a follow-up email to all faculty about, hey, here are some things that came up. If you're not doing them, think about doing them. Right. So very quickly, and I saw somebody taking a photo, don't worry, it's on the slides, so you can get it there. Very quickly, it provides, okay, in this case, communication and interaction. Here are some exact quotes. Open the forum for questions and feedback from students. That's the thing we want to make sure is open. Oh, is that a question or? So, I mean, the way I've been doing a lot of this is I will include the link to the chat log. Generally, if you have an account, it's permanent as anything else is on the web is the best way to describe it. So the question was about citing, like how would you cite this if it was a report you were sharing and stuff? And I would send them to the chat log. I would indicate that part of my method was just, I used it. And, this is what it would surface. I would still want to dig, like once it surfaces something, I would want to go in and take a look at it a little bit more to figure some things out. Thank you. So this is also one of those things where whenever I'm using it, this is the thing that we forget as humans because it's not in our mind to be able to do this well. Or we do this passively. It's like, am I forgetting anything? We'll ask ourselves and we'll be like, no, because we can't objectively step outside of ourselves and do that. But when I'm doing something like that post, the one that I just showed you, the very first question I'm going to ask is like, what are you missing? And sure enough, it will come back and be like, oh, golly gee, I missed X, Y, and Z. Great. Now integrate that into the output that you gave me. And it's a real like it's something simple. And this is where, particularly when you're dealing with documents, telling it to like you can keep doing this. You can do this for like 2 or 3 rounds until you feel really, like it's really gotten it. But that is a way that I found really helpful is just telling it, you're basically telling it to check its work. And inevitably it comes back with, oh yeah, here's 1, 2, 3 things I missed. So I do encourage this as a use of just check your answers. All right. So we already know, again, if we have been in social media at all in the last 18 months, it could be used for lots of different communications, good or bad. Uh, so again, we can use it in different ways, whether it's editing text, revising text, reviewing others' communication for tone or clarity. One of the things that I really, really like about these tools, it's not perfect. It's loaded with biases. All of that's true. And there's ways it unlocks the hidden curriculum of the world. There's ways it can make sense of subtleties that people will miss. There's ways that it can explain things that aren't explicit. My go-to example for this, of course, is the cover letter. Now, I, given my history of employment, feel like I can write a pretty good cover letter. I also think it is one of the like, I don't even know which appropriate or inappropriate word to say, but it just feels so rhetorically loaded and problematic because you have to write this very, very formulaic, but not too formulaic piece of writing that is doing like 15 different things that are subtle and nuanced. And you have to demonstrate your writing ability around all of this, even though like 90% of people's jobs will have nothing to do with how well they write a cover letter. Right. So it's all performance. It's all this balancing of like, I'm professional enough. And also like, I want to just like, show how much I love you as an organization. Like they have to be these love letters that are just over the top. And there has to be all this nuance to it that for lots of different people, for lots of different reasons, whether it is neurodiversity, whether it is language diversity, whether it is just you're like writing is not your strong point. And does it have to be for the type of job that you're applying for? Possibly not, or that type of writing. So to me, this is where using it as a tool of communication, using it to unlock things is really helpful. And that's for others and for ourselves. So again, in this example, uh, I'm telling it it's an expert in communications, student success, asking it to review an email from a student, analyze and provide 3 different interpretations grounded in research, right? Because we all get emails, and I will be like, I've gotten emails where I'm just like, it hits the nerve. It hits the like, the insert the GIF of the monkey slamming on the keyboard and just like throwing the computer to the side. Like we get those emails and trying not to be reactive, but trying to understand like what is this going on. So, here is it's not too far from an email I'm sure has been sitting in somebody's inbox at some point in the last year. Hey, do the homework, don't have the textbook, too much. Also, couldn't make it to class last week. LOL, what I miss. Right? Not that far. And so I asked it, I was like, so how do I make sense of this? Or what are different ways backed by research that I make sense of this? And this is one of the, and I asked it for 3 interpretations. Again, wanting to get different views, different ways of making sense of it. Research based on American College Health Association. College students report high levels of stress. The analysis of students' terse language and fragmented sentences suggests they are feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Lack of formality and detailed explanations might indicate a sense of urgency and frustration. And then it gives an approach, right? So again, it's that this is one of those examples. Caveat with this, and anytime you're using this in relation to students, like I would be very careful about the type of knowledge I put in here. I would make sure there's no personal knowledge, no personal information about the student. If a student is sharing something that is deeply personal and I'm looking for a way to respond, I'm not putting the email in there. That feels problematic. I will, though, say, I have a student who has communicated X to me. How do I compassionately respond? Or how do I compassionately and concisely respond? Or whatever the need is for responding to that. Because it can be tricky. Like we want to walk that balance, but sometimes we just need some examples, just like our students. All right. So final pro tip in using it is, again, as you go and start to use it, this is always the first prompt that I work with, which is improve the following prompt to maximize the creativity and analytical capabilities of a large language model, colon, and then I put in the prompt. So this is actually, AI, I want you to tell me how to talk to you better, right? So again, you're saying, here's what I got. Can you make it better so that you will be better? It's really helpful. It's helpful because it will often produce something that's better than what I was asking. But it's also helpful because the more that I do this, the more that I learn about how it makes sense of language, right? So it's both a tool for learning for myself and also inevitably will put out a more robust prompt. Sometimes that prompt isn't perfect and I'm going to adjust it, but it's likely to still be better than what it was that I was putting into it. All right. How about some questions? Yeah. So the question is, elaborating more on when and where to cite it. Anything that I think is going to directly end up in something that somebody else is looking at, I'm gonna cite it. I'm gonna increasingly, if you follow the resources, I have a Substack, and I'm often doing stuff with generative AI, like around article analysis and things like that. I will include a link to. I'll say, here's the chat log. So that's usually how I think about it. The other way I'll think about it is if I like in that brainstorming example, I will, if it's brainstorming just for me to kind of get up and go somewhere, I'm fine with not worrying about it unless I like realize like, oh, actually I'm using actual language. Or the other time is if I'm starting to brainstorm something that I'm then working with a group, I'll let them know like these are the ideas that I started with using generative AI. And with a lot of the folks that I work with, because of what I've been doing, they're kind of used to it by now. Like there's no, the first time or two, they were just like, oh, that's interesting. Didn't think of that. And now they're starting to do more of it. But I do think, the line I've gone, the thing there's a lot of concerns about how to cite it properly. I've not always, I've gotten to that point, I don't want to worry about the small details of where to put a comma. I don't think that's useful to our students. I want them to just be able to make it explicit. And increasingly that's been for me encouraging students, share the chat log. And so that can be like my point of reference. The other thing that I've been working with and we'll be doing this semester in a class is the chat log is the assignment. So particularly around reflection. Reflection is amazing. Reflection is super important for learning. It's also a practice. And if you haven't been practicing it, you haven't developed a practice of it, often you can have very, very superficial answers. And as educators, we're not going to see those superficial answers until you submit it. But there are some good prompts out there. Some of them are in the resources where you can turn that generative AI into the interviewer to keep pushing for better answers. So when they say like, I didn't like it, or like, I didn't find it interesting, like you could say, well, specifically, what didn't you like about it? And so the idea is they would submit that chat log and it's being able to see what their responses are in response to the questions that they're getting. Other questions. So the question is like navigating the ethics of its use of the collective knowledge of the world, for lack of a better, to sum up all of the collective digital knowledge of the world. and then also like the environmental problems that generative AI represents. I'm gonna split that because the first part of that question is um, I am a little more radical in that I do hope generative AI breaks copyright. And I say that because, as I mentioned at my intro, my dissertation is focused on academic piracy. And it's focused on the fact that because our copyright system locks things behind paywalls for 70 years, people like Einstein's work is still behind paywalls. Um, to me, we have a system of ownership of knowledge, that doesn't work for scholarship, right? Because scholarship is giveaway literature. The idea of building knowledge is to be able to access knowledge. And a lot of my study is demonstrating like people from independent scholars up through people at Ivy League schools can't access research in order to be scholars. And they have to rely on places like Sci-Hub and LibGen. So that's one piece of it. I do have concerns, about when we're not talking about scholarly literature and the ways it's potentially violating copyright. We also have seen at every intersection of a new technology, that's a thing we have to grapple and wrestle with because there's new ways of dealing with it. Like we saw this in the movement, we saw this as far back in the 1800s when we went from sheet music to records. So it's a problem, but I don't think it's any different from problems we've had before that we're going to have to figure out our way through it. I do think also in some ways this is a transformative use that is different because again, it's not recreating anything or it's not recreating a work that already exists, but it is using the mathematical relationships of those works to figure out something new. The environmental ethical piece of it, yeah, feel very challenged by that. Also, like we can focus on that and we should focus on that. We also societally don't care, unfortunately. Like I care, and also I recognize doesn't stop every one of us here from having a cell phone that has all sorts of minerals that were found and used, were generated through exploitation. Doesn't stop many of us from having vehicles. Like, so on one level, it's like, yes, I'm concerned. And also societally, we actually don't care about those things enough to make our individual personal choices and our collective choices change that narrative. The other piece around that I would address is it is very taxing on the environment. So are lots of our other technologies, and every new technology typically is until it's less so. One colleague really brought this to my attention in two ways. One was like the better we get at prompting, the fewer questions we have to ask it. So there's something to be said of that. Even that prompt of like I put in to improve the prompt means that's fewer prompts I'm going to ask. The other part of it is like I think it was Claude last week. Claude, yeah, Claude last week, reported that they have a new method that cuts down 90% of their energy intake. So I do think they will get better. I do still think it'll be a problem, but it's going to be a problem not just because of them, not just because of generative AI, but because of how we structure our entire energy system and the decisions we collectively and individually make. So there's not great answers. And I will go back and forth internally every day about those challenges, but I don't know that there's like I think for me it's like we have it hasn't stopped us in anywhere else. I don't know that where it's going to stop us here. And so then how do I help people that are using it or going to be using it or being expected to use it? Other questions? Takers? All right. Thank you all very much.